Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Bob Sanborn, President and CEO of Children at Risk. We are a statewide advocacy and research organization here in Texas. And today we're here to talk a little bit about the recent cuts within the Department of Education, the U.S. Department of Education, what that means for students here in Texas. Specifically, we're going to talk a little bit in depth around those cuts to the Office of Bilingual Education and bilingual programs that are happening in the state of Texas, the impact that will have on this large, very large portion of our population. We have a good panel, a great panel, if you will, of people here to say a few words around these cuts. Jonathan Feinstein, the state director of Texas for the Education Trust in Texas. Jonathan, thank you very much for being here. Montserrat Garibay, who is the former assistant deputy secretary and director of the Office of English Language Acquisition at the U.S. Department of Education. Thank you, Montserrat, for being here. Alejandra Vázquez Baur, who's a fellow at the Century Foundation. We're excited to have her here. Thank you, Alejandra. In Houston, Jida Nabulsi, who's with Emgage. She's the Texas State Director. Thank you very much. Out in El Paso, Linda Corchado, who's the Senior Director of the Children's Immigration Network at Children at Risk. Thank you, Linda, for being here. So as we talk about some of these issues, I want to get right into it. Our goal at Children at Risk is the same goal that every single Texas parent has, and that's the success of all of our children. However, when we see these cuts at the U.S. Department of Education, with the expressed goal, frankly, of cutting the Department of Education completely, this represents a direct threat to the success of children in Texas. And don't get me wrong, who isn't a fan of cutting bureaucratic bloat? However, when you start cutting programs that really directly benefit the children of Texas, we have to stand up and say, stop and sort of reimagine what you're doing or look at some of the things that are going on here. Currently, Texas receives the second highest amount of federal funding of any state in the country. And there are key things that the U.S. Department of Education does for Texas students. Everything in higher education, grants for college, like Pell Grants, student loans. These are things that help Texans afford college and are run through the Department of Education. Those are at risk. We see at risk support for students with special needs, including making sure that school districts across the state are doing the job that so many parents see as they really need and that they consider essential. We really worry about this diminished support for students with disabilities. The department's staff cuts include special education experts, lawyers responsible for ensuring compliance with the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. And this reduction really hampers the enforcement of special ed services, potentially leaving a lot of students with disabilities without real necessary support. I think also Texans should really be worried about the threats to early childhood education programs, programs in early education, which really provide a lot of support for low-income families. They're at risk here to these funding uncertainties. The department's workforce reduction really could lead to significantly decreased support and oversight for critical early education or early childhood initiatives. I think the other thing that not a lot of people are talking about is the threat to career and technical education, another real important thing here in the state of Texas. I think one of the things I'm very worried about is this idea of support for districts that have populations of significant low-income kids or kids that are coming from low-income families. We have to remember 65% of all the children in our K through 12 public schools are coming from low-income families. So when we take away or when we diminish the importance of the support that the federal government gives to districts that are serving low-income kids, it's going to have this impact. And finally, what we really want to talk about today is that we have in the state of Texas a significant population of bilingual language learners, kids that are English language learners that are coming from bilingual backgrounds. And when we cut the Office of English Language Acquisition, OELA, and that's what's happened to date, this decision effectively eliminates federal leadership, educator support, and resources designed to help emergent bilingual kids succeed in school. So when we look at this, 20% of the student body in the state of Texas are English language learners. This is about 1.2 million, almost 1.3 million children in our student population. This population is the fastest growing part of our population. And one of the things that a lot of people don't understand is that while immigration may have partly something to do with this, we are a Latino state in many ways. We are a legal immigration hub in many ways. And so we have a lot of children here that are American citizens that are still bilingual language learners. I myself grew up in Puerto Rico. You have to remember Puerto Ricans are American citizens, and there's a lot of people that speak Spanish that are really trying to learn English, or other language that are trying to learn English. So the other thing that in regards to this is that there's a lot of popularity with dual language programs in our schools. Another area that's at threat. When we think about these high performing dual language schools across our state, again, these are going to be at some threat. So these cuts have been explained away as waste, or there's a focus on immigration, or they're unnecessary programs. The reality is that these are all part of a delicate recipe for the success of students in our state. We need these supports for our children's success, for the success of our economy, for the success of our future workforce, and frankly, for the success of Texas. When you start playing with the lives of children and endangering their future, you're really endangering all of Texas. And so the staff loves it when I paraphrase, King of the Hill. But when we think about these cuts just ain't right. And I think it's important for us to really recognize that this is not the direction that we need to go as a state. And as Texans, we need to stand up and say, hey, I get that you're cutting waste, but let's not cut these specific programs that are really helping our kids. So let's go on to our panel. Jonathan Feinstein is the state director for Texas of the Education Trust in Texas. Jonathan, what's your take on all of these cuts?
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, I'm probably going to build on and maybe add some numbers to your fantastic layout and introduction of what's at stake and candidly what's already in motion as a result of the actions that are being taken at the U.S. Department of Education. So I would start by just saying that this really creates a degree of uncertainty and instability for our state's students, families, teachers, communities, at a time when we really can't afford it if we ever could. But right now, Texas is actually ranked in the bottom half of all states for really key academic outcomes like fourth grade reading, eighth grade math. We actually know this from recent NAEP results. Ironically enough, the NAEP itself is under threat from some of the cuts that the Department of Education is making. So just, make no mistake, right? Dismantling the Department of Education or otherwise gutting it is already starting to cause irreparable harm for the more than 5.5 million students in our Texas public schools. Who rely upon nearly $4 billion annually in federal funding. Bob, you mentioned kind of how some of this breaks down, but that includes close to $2 billion in Title I funding that directly benefits the more than 3.6 million low-income students across our state. Another 1.3 billion in IDEA funding that provides essential services to the more than 800,000 students with disabilities in the state. And to put a fine point on that, this isn't just about funding. This is about legal civil rights protections that the department is charged with safeguarding. And removing these staff members puts them at tremendous risk in terms of the protections afforded to them under that law that is passed by Congress, including the right to a free and appropriate public education. Bob mentioned, other concerns, other areas. That includes $13 million to support homeless children, $22 million for rural schools, $131 million for career and technical education. So it's hard to overstate the essential resources that the Department of Education provides to our state. In the higher education area, the numbers are maybe even a little bit more staggering. The Department of Education distributes and oversees $9.2 billion in financial aid through Pell Grants, work study programs, and other forms of assistance for 4.5 million Texans who are pursuing higher education. So when you think about the fact that 63% of all the jobs in Texas are going to require some level of post-secondary education within the next 5 years, this would really damage our competitiveness as a state and harm our students' long-term financial stability. So, yeah, I mean, to put it simply, this is unacceptable. The department is, the primary federal safeguard for our students' civil rights, ensures that all of our students, regardless of race, of disability, of income, of primary language, are provided access to a high quality public education. And so, we are very concerned that these actions risk returning us to an era where civil rights violations go unchallenged, where whole groups of students are left behind, and education becomes a privilege and not a right. So I'll stop there, but thank you, Bob.
Yeah, thank you. Jonathan Feinstein is the director at EdTrust in Texas. Thank you very much. He's up in Dallas. Thank you for those remarks. Let's go to Montserrat Garibay. She is the former assistant deputy secretary and director of the Office of English Language Acquisition at the U.S. Department of Education. She's out of Austin. Montserrat, can start in English, and then I'll ask you a few words in Spanish as well. But can you give us your take on this?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Buenos días. Yeah, as you share, I had the opportunity to lead the Office of English Language Acquisition under the Biden and Harris administration. And, without OELA, we have 5.3 million English learners nationwide, and they will lose the crucial federal funding. And I think it's important to point out that over 70% of these emergent bilinguals in the US, many of them are US citizens, and they deserve access to an education system that will help them succeed. Now, the elimination of OELA, of course, is devastating. It's a devastating loss for educators, school district, but most importantly, our students. The 16 OELA federal workers that were serving OELA, they were committed professionals and had so much institutional knowledge to serve our emergent bilinguals. And it is important to point out that the programs with OELA are also part of a statute and they need congressional notification. So we're wondering what happened to that, right? In addition, a large number of civil rights lawyers were also fired. So I think it's important to point out that OELA was instrumental in helping schools administer and manage Title III projects, supporting dual language programs, and providing professional development for teachers working with bilingual students. Now, since 2002, the federal appropriations for one of the programs, the National Professional Development Program, have totaled over $900 million to help educators meet high standards and to obtain certifications to teach emergent bilinguals. Now, currently, there are over 100 NPD grants still in development, and grantees have been totally left in the dark. They have no monitoring, no technical assistance, and have had no communication about what's going to happen to their grants. Now, just last November, we released a new competition of National Professional Development grants, where we had 13 IHS and school districts that were going to focus on bilingual teacher development, which we all know there's a shortage of bilingual educators. Now, I think the lack of technical assistance and the federal monitoring of these grants will lead a lot of uncertainty and inconsistency in how schools are serving our emergent bilinguals. Again, leaving them without the resources that they need. Quite frankly, this is a blunt attack on our most vulnerable students, and we must fight to ensure that they receive the support that they deserve. Also, our nation cannot afford to test what would happen if this significant number of students population doesn't receive the education that they need when they need it in the way that they need it. And we're devastated by the actions of the federal government.
Montserrat, ¿nos puedes hablar un poco en español para la prensa latino y para familias latino? ¿Qué va a pasar con familias aquí en Texas que son bilingües? ¿Qué va a pasar con esos programas bilingües aquí en Texas?
Claro que sí, mira, la Oficina de Adquisición del Idioma Inglés era responsable del título 3 y este era el único programa de subsidios que específicamente estaba diseñado para apoyar a los estudiantes que están aprendiendo inglés y a los estudiantes inmigrantes que están llegando a nuestras escuelas. El título 3 otorgaba subsidios y dinero a agencias educativas locales y estatales para implementar programas que garantizaran que los estudiantes estaban aprendiendo y que tuvieran altos rendimientos educativos y en su idioma. Este ataque, como lo hemos mencionado, es realmente en contra de nuestros estudiantes más vulnerables y debemos de luchar pues para garantizar que reciban este tipo de apoyos. Algo importante es que los padres de familia por supuesto que están muy preocupados porque los estudiantes que están aprendiendo inglés, pues se beneficiaban de muchos programas de fuentes de financiamiento administrado por el departamento y esto incluía financiamiento de programas, rendición de cuentas, informes, supervisión, el cumplimiento de orientación de los derechos civiles, investigaciones, asistencia técnica, tantas cosas. Si un padre de familia tenía una queja, si un padre de familia sentía que sus hijos no estaban siendo tratados con respeto y dignidad, por decirlo así, ellos podían hacer una queja. Ahora con este corte, pues los abogados de la Oficina de Derechos Civiles los han corrido de sus posiciones, entonces hay mucha ansiedad de cómo les va a ayudar a los estudiantes. Simplemente en el año fiscal del 2024, el Departamento de Educación apoyó al estado de Texas con programas y servicios para 3.6 millones de estudiantes en Texas en las escuelas con bajos recursos y más de 1 millón que están aprendiendo inglés y más de 703,000 estudiantes con discapacidad. Entonces, vamos a ver que esto realmente pues va a tener mucha incertidumbre para nuestra comunidad, que es el futuro de nuestra nación. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Montserrat. Let's go to Alejandra Vázquez Baur. She's a fellow at the Century Foundation. She's in an airport today, so we're going to excuse any sort of gate announcements, if you will. Alejandra, give us an idea of your take and the take of the Century Foundation on these cuts that are happening at the department, especially in OELA.
Thanks, Bob, for having me as we address the Trump administration's attack on public education in Texas and across the country. As we all said, I'm Alejandra Vázquez Baur, and I'd like to just start really quickly as I'm the granddaughter of formerly undocumented immigrant farm workers from Jalisco, Mexico, and I carry that with me. I think that's really important for our work that we remember our roots because those luchadores, the fighters that came before us, are the reason that we continue to do this work and why I do this work alongside you also. Thank you for having me. Millions of Americans rely on federal support from the Department of Education to open doors along their educational journeys, from nearly 1 million infants, toddlers, and preschoolers with disabilities or developmental delays who have access to early intervention and special education services through the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, to the 26 million pre-K through 12 students supported by federal Title I funding, to the 43 million people with federal student loans. There are 4 of the many ways that students and families stand to lose if the Trump administration succeeds in gutting the Department of Education, specifically around K-12 issues. And the first of those is students with disabilities will lose critical resources and protections. One of the Department of Education's core responsibilities is to administer programs created by the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, under which 7.5 million disabled students, roughly 15% of the student population, have received individualized education services, including pre-employment transition services, special education support services, and much more. While the Trump administration cannot scrap IDEA or its funding without congressional approval, it could attempt to move the administration of IDEA over to another government agency. And this kind of change has a drastic and immediate impact on students with disabilities because there's no other federal agency with the expertise needed to oversee special education and ensure the rights of students to a free and appropriate public education. Disabled students, half of whom have learning or speech and language disabilities, rely every day on protections in federal law to get services that keep them safe and able to advance educationally. Local school districts across the country rely on federal funds daily to support students with disabilities, pay special education teachers and therapists, and buy the materials and equipment that students need. And in addition to providing the funding for these programs, the Department of Education stands as a bulwark against violations of student civil rights, ensuring that students served under IDEA and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act receive the educational supports and services that they require. A new administering agency would likely lack a deep understanding of these laws and the enforcement power behind them. Transitioning these responsibilities out of the Department of Education could very well lead to states choosing restrictive settings and approaches that flout longstanding legal requirements of integrating students with disabilities into classrooms and experiences with their non-disabled peers. And students and families may find themselves without the supports and protections to which they're legally entitled, putting additional strain on an already underfunded and understaffed program and resulting in real impacts on educational attainment and achievement for an entire class of students. Second, low-income students could see their schools lose teachers and counselors, cut family engagement and mental health programs, and be unable to afford new books and other classroom and curricular materials. Largest K-12 program run under the Department of Education is Title I, which provides funding to schools that enroll high percentages of low-income students. Nearly 2/3 of all public schools receive Title I funding, and these funds ensure that those schools have extra support, such as more teachers, money for supplies, access to better curriculum, behavioral mental health supports, and more to help low-income children succeed and help make up for the gaps between rich and poor school districts that exist in state and local funding systems, which typically disadvantage poorer areas with lower property tax revenue. Like the IDEA, Title I is part of federal law, so the Trump administration cannot fully cancel or defund it without Congress. However, the executive orders on education issued so far have already shown an intention to misuse existing K-12 funding for unauthorized purposes, despite the fact that to do so is flagrantly illegal. The Trump administration may attempt to take the route outlined by Project 2025, which is to phase out Title I over several years or converting it into a no strings attached block grant, in which funding is given to states rather than to local education agencies without accountability for making sure it's being spent in ways that help low-income students. States are projected to lose money under this administration, and they could choose to use these limited funds simply to reduce their own education investments, cutting the important services and supports that Title I currently funds. Third, and critically mentioned by many other folks, is that students and their families could lose federal protections against civil rights violations. The department plays a key role in enforcing civil rights laws that protect students from discrimination based on race or national origin, immigration status, sex, disability, religion, through the work of its Office for Civil Rights. OCR investigates individual complaints, such as when a child is denied access to special education services outlined in their individualized education plan, or experiences harassment in school based on their gender identity or sexual orientation, as well as complaints seeking to protect groups of students, such as when Black students are receiving harsher discipline than white students for the same exact offenses. As such, OCR has historically served as an important tool of accountability and enforcement for both individual families and large groups of students and communities. The Trump administration is expected to turn this enforcement on its head in ways that harm historically marginalized students. We've already seen executive orders targeting transgender students under the guise of upholding women's rights. The administration has fired OCR staff, and may also try to cut all funding for OCR as proposed in their Project 2025, or move it to the Department of Justice, where students and families would have to take all complaints to the courts. It's a more complicated process that is expensive and harder for families to access, rather than having the option of the administrative enforcement system that's currently in place. Those changes would slow down the process and decrease the likelihood of timely remedies for students whose rights have been violated. In addition, the new U.S. Attorney General has already issued a memo to refocus priorities with the Department of Justice, including turning the attention of Civil Rights Division to rooting out DEI and EIA policies in private companies, further indicating that education-related civil rights claims will receive insufficient attention if housed at the Department of Justice. With all civil rights complaints going through there, the likelihood of any timely remedy for the students experiencing harm in our public schools will be close to zero. And finally, students and families could lose access to wraparound supports and enrichment programs, innovative teaching models, and public school choice options. In addition to those large formula funding programs, such as those in IDEA and Title I, as mentioned, where the funding criteria are set in law, U.S. Department of Education operates dozens of discretionary grant programs through which funding is awarded based on competitive process with more leeway for the department to exercise judgment. Public schools across the country depend on these grants to fund a host of different educational supports, including investments in early literacy, academic acceleration, enrichment programs, teacher development, and so much more. In addition, those support investments to upgrade school technology, to start community schools that offer health services and more to families, and to run before and after school programs that benefit students and working families. They expand school choice by funding the growth and creation of magnet schools and charter schools that benefit all. In total, this is an attack on our children's future, the children of Texas and the children across the country, and the future of our country. Our students deserve so much better, and we must hold those in power accountable for putting politics over the well-being and future of all of our children, not just those of a few. Congress and the administration has to restore these critical functions of the American educational system if we believe in public education and the values of this country. Thank you.
Alejandra, thank you so very much. Very, very briefly, ¿nos puedes decir en algunas palabras la cosa más importante para familias latinos aquí en Texas?
Sí, gracias, Bob. Quería decir ánimo, que nuestros antepasados nos han enseñado que somos más fuertes cuando resistimos en comunidad. Estoy muy orgullosa de seguir los pasos de esos luchadores y la resistencia y la lucha sigue en este momento juntos. Gracias.
Thank you very much, Alejandra. Let's go to Houston. Jida Nabulsi is the Texas State Director for Emgage. And Jida, give us your take on all of this, because you have some stories around this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of we care very deeply and are disappointed about all the federal cuts to education, which is going to severely impact our emergent bilingual population and really the opportunity for them to thrive in their new communities. And to give you an example of that, we were working with a student that is an emergent bilingual program. And without the support that he received from middle school and high school, he would have not graduated high school fluent in English, and then is now in a full-time position and going to university working on his bachelor's degree. And these are the types of things that our emergent bilingual students typically don't realize that they have the opportunity to do, because they don't think that they are, they're maybe not motivated or don't know that these doors are there for them, but they're already at a disadvantage. So further taking away these resources to help motivate them and really understand for them to see what options there are, this is going to significantly decrease the thriving factor for our immigrant students in public schools and having the actual equity and opportunity to thrive in their new environments and really be successful and see the light at the end of the tunnel. So, I'll keep my comments, brief there, but I wanted to at least highlight that one situation where we've got students who have the ability to thrive here. They just need someone and the opportunity to be able to do so.
Jida, I think a lot of people don't realize, a lot of Texans don't realize that a full 20% of our student body are English language learners. They're trying to acquire English so that they can be successful in the state of Texas. And what does it mean when, you mentioned this one student, but overall, when you think of all the students that you and I and others here work with, and so many around the state work with, what is it going to mean if there's even a slight cut, but certainly this whole office has been cut, so it's not even slight,
Yeah.
When we talk about this, what is the impact on 1/5 of our students in Texas?
I mean, we're going to be further isolating this community at point blank. Just to give you an idea, and we live in a state that Spanish is pretty much a second language. And I'll give you a perspective from one of our Spanish-speaking students. When we had wraparound services implemented and mentors who were working with them because of the funding, there was a drawing that this student did and recognized saying, you know, because of this person, I was able to talk to someone. I felt isolated. So now we're talking about taking away further funding to put people where they really need to be. These students are going to feel super isolated, even more than they already are. And that concerns us as, you know, for the future of our community in general.
Yeah, very good. Jida Nabulsi is the Texas State Director for Emgage, and she's out of Houston. Lastly, but certainly not leastly, let's go to Linda Corchado, who is the Senior Director at the Children's Immigration Network and Children at Risk, and she's out in El Paso. Linda, what's your take on what's happening here with the Department of Education, specifically as it relates to so many of the students that we deal with in our state?
I think Jida's perspectives are grounding because in Greater Houston area, they received 31% of the state's total Title III funding. And what we've seen in our report that we released last year, Charting Success, where we're evaluating the educational outcomes of students, emergent bilingual students and immigrant students in the state of Texas, we see that when school districts receive those Title III funds and spend those funds appropriately, that students really enjoy positive educational outcomes. And you see that in Houston, which has a relatively high English proficiency rates in that area. And that's attributed to that federal funding. So here in Texas, we really work in harmony with the federal government, which supports us with these federal funds and with the staffing and support to support our teachers, right, where we're suffering teacher shortages. But when we have those additional supports and connections to improve outcomes, we see in the state that really makes a significant impact on us. You know, I mentioned Houston. Here in the borderland, we also have the highest population in the entire state of emergent bilingual students. Just from 2013 to 2023, we saw our EBEL student population grow by 49% in Texas. That, like our speakers have mentioned, this is a fast-growing population. These supports are critical, not just for the development of our kids, not just to ensure that our students are assimilated in our communities, but also for our economies. This is an economic imperative to support these students, and we've got to get this right. And we really hope that a lot of Texans are paying close attention to these developments at the Department of Education. El año pasado tuvimos un reporte aquí en Children at Risk que se enfoca mucho en los resultados de estudiantes inmigrantes y estudiantes bilingües en el estado para ver cómo están procesando información, cómo es su progreso en sus pruebas. Y vemos que en escuelas que reciben estos fondos de parte del gobierno federal, esas escuelas tienen la capacidad para apoyar a sus estudiantes en una forma muy importante, y vemos eso en los resultados, ¿verdad? Cuando estas escuelas gastan estos fondos, los resultados son mejores para nuestros estudiantes. En Texas, esta población está creciendo rápidamente y debemos de tomar mucha precaución y ver lo que está pasando en estos cambios, porque pueden tomar un impacto muy grande, muy severo para nuestros estudiantes aquí en Texas.
Linda, thank you very, very much for those remarks, and thank you for the work that you're doing for these kids every day. I want to thank all of you. Jonathan Feinstein, State Director for EdTrust here in Texas. Secretary Garibay, thank you very, very much for the work that you're doing. Alejandra at the Century Foundation, Vázquez Baur, thank you very much. Jida Nabulsi from Emgage, and Linda. Thank you all very, very much. The work continues. Thank you all so very much.